the West is led by monsters, and you are friends with those monsters, ethno-supremacists and
well, I won't, to be honest with
exceptionalists.
you, look, you know what? You do this, like we have a perfectly civilized conversation, and then you can't resist. No, hang on.
You said S-H-I-T.
You can't resist.
S-H-I-T.
And you can't.
So guys, in this explosive confrontation, Piers Morgan attempts to paint Iran as a rudderless ship and a defeated power, but he quickly realizes that Professor Mohammad Marandi didn't come to play. What starts as a debate over the Strait of Hormuz and nuclear dust quickly turns into a brutal exposure of the Trump-Netanyahu alliance's failures. Professor Marandi brings the receipts, detailing how the US and Israel have repeatedly violated ceasefires, targeted schools, including a horrific strike that murdered 168 young girls, and used siege tactics as acts of war to manipulate global markets. Piers tries to hide behind the usual talking points of Western moral superiority, but he's met with the cold reality of history. The West's support for Saddam Hussein's chemical weapons and the 1953 coup. This isn't just a clash of opinions, it's a direct challenge to the monsters leading Western foreign policy who are dragging the global economy toward a depression for the sake of an ethno-supremacist regime. Watch as Piers resorts to personal jabs and propagandist labels when he can no longer defend the indefensible actions of the Trump administration. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe to Floor Leader Insider to stay updated on the most critical political breakdowns. I'll be giving my raw thoughts about this exchange at the end of this clip. Now, let's dive right into this heated exchange.
Where is this war now, as far as Iran is concerned?
Well, the reports from Axios are nonsense, and the belief here was for market manipulation, and some people probably made a huge amount of money, people close to the White House. The Iranians are not going to send the so-called nuclear to Iran's nuclear material will remain in Iran. But what Iran expects is that the United States implement the ceasefire agreement that we had when the fighting stopped on day 39. After that, the two sides agreed that there would be a regional ceasefire, and Netanyahu immediately started carpet bombing Lebanon, the democratic state that your previous guest was talking about. He carpet bombed Lebanon, murdering hundreds of people within a few minutes, many of them in neighborhoods that were not even sympathetic to the resistance, just so that he could block the ceasefire. And then Trump went and said that Lebanon is not a part of the ceasefire. And of course, the Pakistani government had to come out and say, actually, it is indeed a part of the ceasefire. So there was supposed to be a regional ceasefire, including Lebanon, Gaza, elsewhere. And then ships that were affiliated to the 5 countries helping the United States in the war against Iran, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates, they were supposed to be able to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Finally, when Netanyahu was forced to accept the ceasefire, even though he, again, afterwards began the slaughter, then the United States refused to remove the siege on Iranian ports, which is an act of war and a violation of the ceasefire too. So basically, the ships are not moving because of Netanyahu and then Trump. And I should stress that the Strait of Hormuz is not closed. Countries that did not engage in war with Iran, their ships go through, like Russia, like China, like Iraq. Indian ships have gone through and others. But those that are affiliated to these countries or have goods from these countries, that they're the ones, the 5 countries that engaged in the war, they're the ones who are limited or restricted.
So how does a deal look like from Tehran's perspective? Donald Trump and his administration have been very bullish about, we're very near to getting a deal, and most of what the Americans would like out of this deal is going to be agreed. We're just trying to work out who to talk to and so on. But from Tehran's point of view, for example, on that issue of enriched uranium, can you envisage any deal with the United States which involves the voluntary handing over of that enriched uranium, or any verbal guarantee to do so on any timeline?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that for the Iranians, who didn't start this war, and the Iranians have been much more careful not to kill civilians, even though Iran carried out huge devastation across the Persian Gulf. I think less than 20 people in these 5 countries were killed, whereas 3,400, 500 Iranians were murdered. And the same is true with the Israeli regime. Very few people were killed there. Iran didn't target synagogues, unlike the synagogue in Tehran that the Israelis bombed. Iran did not target schools, unlike the Americans and the Israelis that did target schools, and so on. But the Iranians are saying that when the war started, when the invasion began, Trump was demanding unconditional surrender, like the 12-day war that he started months earlier. And he failed. And by day 39, Trump accepted the Iranian 10-point plan as the basis for negotiations. Why? Because he failed. He lost the war. It's obvious. Otherwise, he wouldn't have accepted. And so based on that, Iran accepted a ceasefire. So obviously, first we have to have the ceasefire, which the Americans and Netanyahu are violating. And that's why the global economic crisis is getting worse by the hour, because of the siege, which violates the ceasefire, and the slaughter in Lebanon and in Gaza. So once there is a ceasefire, then, which can be implemented now, Trump can right now say, I lift the siege, Netanyahu has to stop killing kids, and then the ships will go through the Strait of Hormuz. It's as simple as that. And then we move on to the 10-point Iranian plan that has to be negotiated. After all, war was carried out against our people. In just one strike, the Americans murdered 168 little girls in a school. So there has to be compensation. Someone has to pay. The Americans think that since Trump thinks that since it's an empire, we don't have negotiations. They dictate terms. Iran is not like other countries where the United States bullies and says you have to, abide by our tariffs. That's not how Iran works. And I think Trump by now should have understood that. When he imposed this attempt to starve ordinary Iranians with his siege, that failed too. That's why he was in such a rush to carry out this new operation, which also failed. And most probably, Trump is going to launch another attack on Iran with his brother in arms, Netanyahu, and that will fail too. And it's only going to drag the world to an economic collapse, to an economic depression. I assure you, Piers, the course that the United States is taking, for the sake of the Israeli regime, not for the American people, it's all for the sake of Zionism, is dragging the world to economic depression. And this could have ended, this shouldn't have started in the first place. But after the 39-day war, we could have, if they had abided by the ceasefire, the global economic situation would be infinitely different from what it is now.
I have had other guests, including Victor Davis Hanson just now, who say it's been actually a clear victory for the United States militarily. They've caused enormous damage to Iran's military, which I think is unarguable. And that if they wanted to militarily reopen the Strait of Hormuz, they could do it in a heartbeat, but for political reasons, they're not taking that option at the moment. And that actually no one's quite sure who's running Iran. The new supreme leader has not been seen in public. And therefore, the assumption is that actually it's a rudderless ship and is far more damaged than Iran would ever care to admit. So my first question about that would be, where is your supreme leader? No one's seen him. Is he alive?
Oh, he is alive and well. And Piers, I don't think anyone who knows anything about anything takes anything you say seriously. Because if Iran has been defeated, and if they could take the Strait easily, and if Iran has no leaders and things are falling apart, and the insulting language that you use about Iran, if that was all correct, then it's over. Then you don't have to have this conversation with me. Go and do what you like to do. That's not what's happening, isn't it? The United States has been humiliated, and the Zionist regime has been exposed for the genocidal regime that it is. Of course, last time I asked you 3 times, what do you think about an ethno-supremacist regime? And you refused to answer. But the fact is that the United States is doing all of this and destroying the global economy for an ethno-supremacist regime to preserve that. But if they're really worried about the U.S. economy and the world economy, then why don't they just open the strait and take out the oil and take the country, and we'll all be refugees like the Palestinians, where you kicked them out of their homes in 1948.
I mean, President Trump has indicated that's exactly what he may do if there's no deal.
Well, that's because the West is led by monsters, and you are friends with those monsters, ethno-supremacists and
well, to be honest with
exceptionalists.
you, look, you know what? You do this. Like, we have a perfectly civilized conversation, and then you can't resist. No, hang on.
You said shit.
You can't resist.
shit.
And you can't. What you can't resist doing is putting your fake halo on your head and pretending that you yourself do not help prop up a monstrous regime. You talk about, America has to be held accountable for killing people. What about Iran's regime, which for 47 years has killed so many people, not least its own people, as we saw in January? Should they be held accountable for that? Would you like to see your regime held accountable for the thousands of protesters it killed in January, for the Americans it's killed, for the Israelis it's killed, for the way it's propped up Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, to cause endless terrorism all over the Middle East? Would you like your regime to be held accountable for that monstrous activity?
Piers, first of all, you used that word that I won't repeat. And that's exactly how you like to frame things. You started insulting Iran, and I gave you a much more civilized response.
What is the word you're talking about? Sorry.
You said shit.
No, I didn't.
That's not how I heard it.
I didn't.
If that's not what you said.
Sorry, just to be clear.
Okay, then I'm
at
mistaken.
No stage of this interview
then I'm mistaken.
have I said that.
Okay, then I'm mistaken.
Yeah,
then I'm mistaken. I thought you said. But first of all, I asked you to come to Iran. You could have seen what Iran is like.
I've asked you to come here. You haven't come either. So you know what?
Well, I've lived there. I've lived there, Piers. Yeah. I've lived there. I've been there many times. Yeah. I did my PhD there. So there's a bit of a difference, just so you.
Yeah, but you haven't come, and I haven't come. So we're in the same boat.
I've been there times. I was there on the anti. I was actually in that protest that you and I discussed about together in 2003, when you were a somewhat different person than you are now.
I wasn't a different person at all. I was exactly the same person.
Let me respond. Let me respond. As a person, well, first of all, I asked you to read that book, Going to Tehran by Flint and Hillary Leverett, and I'm sure you didn't bother to do so. But as a person who survived...
To be honest with you, Professor, I know that you think you can just bark out your instructions to me as if somehow I'm beholden to the Iranian regime over what books I should be reading, but I don't really feel that burning desire to read books just because Professor Marandi, the chief propagandist for the Iranian regime, tells me to. Call me naive.
Sure, do what you like. Do what you like. But as a person who survived 2 chemical attacks that your regime helped give to Saddam Hussein, I don't think you or your government or the
I led the campaign against the Iraq war that my government waged in 2003, as you know.
No, that's not when they used chemical weapons, Piers. They used them in the 1980s, and your government gave it to Saddam Hussein. Back then, he was your friend. Back then, he was your ally. You forget that you've waged 3 wars against my country. We're the bad guys, of course, but you carried out a coup in 1953. Then during the revolution, when people were on the streets, your regime supported the Shah, gunning down people. Then after the revolution, they encouraged Saddam Hussein to invade our country. The West gave him chemical weapons. I survived both mustard gas and nerve agents in 2 separate attacks. Many didn't survive, but that wasn't important in the West back then.
Can I ask you one question before we finish? Just one question. I'm not responsible for what my government did when I was a teenager, just to be clear. But just one question for you.
Of course you are.
No, I've got a question.
Every human being.
No, I'm not.
Every human being who's politically aware is responsible.
I'm asking you a question, though. I'm asking you a question.
And I am too.
Okay, I'm asking you a question, which is one that is put by a lot of my viewers. I'm just curious of the answer. I'm not being accusatory. But you always do these interviews with apparently a full internet signal in a country where many people have had their internet turned off since January. How are you doing that? And why is it one rule for you and another for the large majority of the people of Iran?
Well, first of all, as I told you, you already asked me this question before. During the war, the internet was never off. It was off to the international internet, Iranian internet, and Iranian websites and Iranian apps were used. But back then, during the war, they were using the internet to find targets in Iran and to murder people and to destroy Iranian infrastructure. So they limited that. Back then, if you recall, and as I explained, I was not using my own internet. Now they've opened up the internet more. They've helped me to be able to use this, but to use a better internet connection. But as we speak, I am using a VPN, like most other people. But I think the best thing for you to do is to counter my arguments. Your country bombed my country. The United States slaughtered children. And that's why we had internet restrictions. Otherwise, before the slaughter of our people, of our leaders, of our scientists, of our academics, of schools, of bombing apartment blocks, before that, your own
regime, according to many reports, slaughtered up to 30,000 of its own people, including children, in January. But you will say to me, nothing to see here. They're all heavily armed militants.
You believe that?
I believe that over you. Yeah.
You believe that? You believe it. So you believe it?
I do. Yeah. I think many thousands of people.
Then that
were
just shows
slaughtered
that
by your regime. Yeah, I do.
Your regime. Because the evidence shows the Iranians gave the names of all the people who were killed, every single one, 3,117. Hundreds were police officers or officers of the law, and 2,000 of them were people who were caught in the crossfire by people who were armed by your government.
Of course.
Who said they were armed by your government?
They were all killed by the protesters.
Channel 14 of Israel.
That's right, yeah.
Channel 14 of Israel.
Yeah.
Pompeo, know
Forgive
these
me,
people.
Professor Marandi, we've run out of time.
But this doesn't,
but as usual,
your government killed my people.
Professor Marandi, it's always, the reason I get you on, Professor
people.
Marandi, is it's always interesting to hear a voice from Tehran talking, and I appreciate you coming on. I take most of what you say with a massive pinch of salt, but I appreciate
I take it with
that's fine.
Kilos of salt
and that's
when
fine.
It comes to you.
But I appreciate you coming on the program and to giving a perspective from Tehran. Thank you very much.
What we just witnessed was not a debate. It was a collision between the polished, selective memory of Western media and the visceral, unyielding receipts of history. Professor Mohammad Marandi didn't just defend a position, he provided a brutal reminder of why the Global South views the US-Israeli alliance with profound distrust. When Marandi cited the Minab School Massacre, the February 28th triple-tap strike that murdered 168 people, mostly young girls, he wasn't just talking about a statistic. He was talking about a war crime committed under the banner of Project Freedom, that the mainstream media has spent the last 2 months trying to sanitize. Piers Morgan attempts to seize the moral high ground by citing the January massacres, throwing out the 30,000 figure used by Western intelligence to frame Iran as a rudderless ship. But look at how quickly he pivots when Marandi counters with specific data. The 3,117 named victims and the hundreds of security officers killed by foreign armed insurgents. This is the hallmark of the enabler. Piers relies on the fog of war and vague reports of the Supreme Leader's assassination to justify a naval blockade that is currently strangling the global economy and pushing gas prices toward $4.50 a gallon. He mocks Marandi's internet connection while ignoring the fact that his own government is enforcing a siege that constitutes an act of war against a sovereign people. The structural hypocrisy here is staggering. Piers dismisses the West's history of propping up monsters like Saddam Hussein and providing the chemical weapons that Marandi himself survived, claiming he was just a teenager. This isn't just an uncensored host being provocative. It's a representative of the pundit class refusing to accept national accountability for the ethno-supremacist ideology currently driving the Trump-Netanyahu axis. Marandi is 100% correct. The world is being dragged into an economic depression, not for the benefit of the American people, but to preserve a genocidal status quo in the Middle East. As Democrats, we have to call this what it is: a reckless, hawkish foreign policy that prioritizes maximum pressure over human life. When Piers pinches his salt and cuts the mic, he isn't winning a debate. He's admitting that he has no answer for the 168 girls in Minab or the failed ceasefire agreements that Netanyahu continues to carpet bomb his way through. History will not be kind to the smirking journalists who provided PR cover for this slaughter while the world burned. At Floor Leader Insider, we stand with the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, and we demand an end to the monstrous leadership that has taken the global economy hostage. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to Floor Leader Insider as we continue to expose the enablers and hold the architects of this crisis accountable. Stay alert, keep grinding, and I'll see you in the next video.